So the hadith is from the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. It's narrated in a book of ours called Tafsir al-Qummi. The hadith goes like this. Hajjaj, he's speaking with one of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf is an awful person, a tyrant of his own time, something like Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, we've just seen. Right? Somebody who hated Ali alayhi salam, hated all of his followers, and made it a mission of his to kill all the Shia. Okay. That's the kind of person he was. He has a companion, a courtier named Shaykh. And Hajjaj, one of his positive qualities was that he was an incredible, he was a master of Arabic, of the language. He was a poet, and it's famous, it's a legend about him, that he never made a mistake in speaking. And he spoke very, very eloquently, and he was always very, very careful with his words, and beautiful vocabulary, poetry, and stuff like that. So, despite the fact that he had terrible qualities where it really matters, but he had this one virtue, which was that his language skills were excellent. So he admits to this courtier that there's one verse from the Quran that I still don't get. Yeah, I don't really understand what the verse means. So Shaykh, he asks, what's that verse? And he says it's this particular verse. That every single member of the people of the book will believe in Jesus before his death. And what does this mean? I don't understand. He says, the story itself is very funny. He says, إِنِّي لَآمُرُ بِالْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصْرَانِ فَيُضْرَبُ عَنْهُمْ. He says, he's a tyrant. He says, I experiment. The verse seems to be saying something, so I take a prisoner, a Jewish prisoner and a Christian prisoner, and I bring them, and I threaten them with death, and I kill them and experiment to see, at some point do they understand, do they all of a sudden see Jesus and realize the truth? And so he's doing this, it's a Nazi type experiment on people, on human beings. Let me kill them and see what happens. So they're lab rats. Right? So he does this, he says, I kill them and I don't see anything. Nothing on their face tells me they're convinced that they realize the truth. Nothing happens to them. So it seems like I don't understand the verse part. So yeah, that was his way of trying to do tafsir of Quran. So then the companion, the courtier, he says, no, that's not what the verse means. It doesn't mean that every single Christian or Jew will know Jesus before that Christian or Jew dies. Rather, it means this. إِنَّ عِيسَى يَنْزِلُ قَبْلَ يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ إِلَى الدُّنْيَا. That before the day of judgment, Jesus will return back to earth. فَلَا يَبْقَى أَهْلُ مِلَّةِ يَهُودِيٍّ وَلَا غَيْرِهِ إِلَّا آمَنَ بِهِ قَبْلَ مَوْتِهِ. And so when he comes back, not a single Jew or other than Jew, meaning Christian, not a single Jew or Christian will die until he believes in who Jesus is, before Jesus dies. Right? So he interprets it the second way I mentioned. His death means Jesus' death, not the Christian or Jew's death. And then he says, وَيُصَلِّ خَلْفَ الْمَهْدِي. This hadith itself says that Isa alayhi salam, Jesus will pray behind the Mahdi. Hajjaj says, وَيْحَكَ إِنْ أَنَّا لَكَ هَذَا. He says, may God have mercy on you. Where did you get this? And where did you get this interpretation, this understanding? He says, فَقُلْتُ حَدَّثَنِي بِهِ مُحَمَّدُ بْنَ عَلِيِّ بْنَ الْحُسَيْنِ بْنَ عَلِيِّ بْنَ أَبِي طَالِبٍ. Imam Baqir told me this. So he says, Imam Baqir, he doesn't say Imam, but he says, Muhammad Baqir told me this. And so Hajjaj, and with his intense hatred for Shia, he says, Wallahi ji'ta biha min ayn safiya. It's as though you brought this jewel from a clear stream. It's from a very pure source. And so it's a very good interpretation, a good idea. Okay, so that's one hadith that we have to corroborate one interpretation over the other. And so if we were just left with the Quran with no guidance from the Ahlul Bayt, we'd be left with a mutashabih. Some of the verses of the Quran are muhkam. They're unequivocal in their meaning. It's absolutely clear. You read it and you say, Allahu Ahad. There's no way to say Allahu Ahad means God is two or God is three. It's a clear verse, unequivocal. They have so many other verses they're purposely kind of embedded with ambiguity. One of the philosophies behind that ambiguity that's put in some of the verses is to make us realize our own inadequacy, that we can't understand everything. These aren't like the ambiguities are not in essential beliefs that it ruins the whole Quran, ruins our whole system. That's not the case. The muhkamat, the strong, unequivocal verses, those are the ones that establish our basic beliefs, and those tell us the important things. The mutashabihat, these ambiguous verses, these are minor issues. Like, what does it matter whether it's before Jesus dies or before the Jew or Christian dies. In the big picture, it doesn't really matter whether we know it's one way or the other. Right? So it's not going to break the whole Quran down and we throw the whole Quran up because we can't figure out this one pronoun to see if the pronoun goes to one thing or the other. Okay, so the mutashabihat are never in essential matters. But the philosophy behind it then is to remind us that you by yourselves, without a constant guidance from God, can't even understand the Quran properly. Right? Because if everything was totally clear and all we needed was the Quran, we could say Hasbuna Kitabullah like Omar did. But we don't need anything. All we need is the Quran. We don't need the Prophet to tell us anything. Right? But when the ambiguity is there, it's embedded in there, and we have these questions, and we constantly realize that, I understand these 5 verses, but the 6th verse, there's this one thing I don't understand, and there's no contextual clue that helps me. It's ambiguous. Right? We need someone to ask, the Prophet, or when he's gone to the Imams, to ask, and to let them tell us what does this verse refer to, what's the meaning of the verse. Okay, the end of this verse, it's gone now, but the end of the verse was, and on the day of judgment, Jesus says, I will be, or Jesus will be a witness over all people, all the Bani Israel. Right? This is also a challenging verse. We have 2 verses that talk about Jesus as a witness. Right? I did mention something about witnesses before. So, one of the sisters had asked a question about why God has witnesses that are there to observe the actions of people, the intentions of people, and why does He need them on the day of judgment? And God knows everything. Why can't He just judge on His own? Part of the philosophy behind having witnesses like Jesus, like all of our prophets and our imams, over people's actions, is to increase our awareness on our side. It's not that God needs them to better His judgment. His judgment is perfect without them. But we need them. It helps us to know that Imam Mahdi is watching us. And Jesus is watching us. My deeds are being presented to Him. He knows not my deeds, my words, and my intentions. Not just the surface of my actions, but the intentions behind all that. All of that's being presented to these prophets on a daily basis. And having that knowledge, it should increase our awareness of what we do and our concern over whether what we're doing is right or wrong. Sometimes it's easy. I mentioned before. Sometimes it's easy to forget about God, unfortunately, because He's unseen. Right? It's easy to kind of get lost and to be kind of distracted by the world around us, the trappings around us, and to forget about God. But when you have a physical being, a person like the Prophet or the Imams, who you respect, right? You have great respect for these people. Can you imagine, like Imam Mahdi, if he was in the next room and he heard about the sin that you committed today, the backbiting that you did today, the woman that you looked at today, all these different things that we might do. If we have the awareness that the Imam is constantly aware of what we're doing and saying, then it should give us pause and make us refrain from those things. So it has benefit for us. Allah Himself doesn't need it, but we need this thing. And so He's implemented the system of witnesses for the Day of Judgment. So Jesus, in this verse, it says that Jesus will be a witness over all of the Bani Israel and the Christians, the Jews and the Christians, on the Day of Judgment. Let's keep that in the back of our mind. I'm going to look at some other verses now that seem to say a different thing. There seems to be a contradiction between these 2 verses. I want to present these 2 verses and see how we can solve the puzzle.